All right. Week number 5 journal. Um, so this week I got to go to ECT, the level 1 hospital that I work for, and that I'm doing some clinical hours with Dr. Wilson. Also provides ECT. Um, I got to go with Dr. W, and I got to spend the day with him and how the procedure is done. I was actually in the pre-op, you could say, in the procedure and the post-op. Um, wow. um, Total different experience. Um, I think that all nursing that works for a facility that has ECT should go through it to see what it's like and the importance of prepping and the importance of understanding what ECT is to look for symptoms after. Um, so basically, we get patients that are either electing ECT that are inpatient. They can be ECT outpatient, or we also have court ordered ECT. So I got to see some of the patients that we see on the floor come into the procedure. So that was interesting. And so they prep them, they hang LRs, start an IV, and they hang lactate ringers up, check vitals, make sure everything is within limits. They do a timeout before the procedure, ask the patient their name, date of birth, why they're there. They're in a gurney basically. Um, Anesthesiologist is there. Um, she goes by Dr. A. Um, so she does the general anesthesia, does the consent with the patient, and then they're given ketamine and then whatever medications were needed to have them be fully asleep. Um, one patient was like the 200 and some time episode or time that she was in there getting ECT, so they knew her very well. And they adjust the anesthesia based on how long it took them to come back out of the anesthesia, breathing, things like that. So once they're asleep, or anesthesia has kicked in, then Dr. W would get up and get the electrodes ready, and that also is based on the amount that's given is based on the tolerance of the patient. So, the one that was in there had been in there multiple times, was like at the max voltage, and it's the same current that comes out of the socket, the 12-volt socket, and then it's given in impulses, and the amount that you um, that is set for the machine to give, and it basically induces a seizure. So it's placed on bilateral temples, and you just see the patient seize. Um, and then you wait to see how long that seizure lasted, and that's also based on the amount of electricity that you're going to induce. So there was another patient that is schizoaffective. I mean, this little lady, she's 70 some, has been in and out of the facility for many years. She self-harms, she hits others. She is just very, very manic and has responded really well, but is at the full dosage, like at the full voltage. Like there's no increase from that, so they're increasing her time coming in for ECT, which has also helped. But then that's what I also asked, like, when is too much anesthesia too much? Like, you're still inducing sleep. um it's like Dr. W and Dr. A were saying that it's really, the benefits outweigh the risks of the patient. And so anyway, I saw 17 of those. I mean, they go fast, but it's like I got there at 6:30. By 11, I felt like 2 seconds had gone by because it's just so like every case is different. What they present with is different, either depression, sometimes OCD. And then there was one that they knew has a difficult time breathing after the anesthesia, so that one took a little longer. And you're on edge, like you're just on edge. Unfortunately, the other thing is, and I'm sure every other hospital is like this, but there's just not enough training for nurses. The hospital that I work at are just so in need of psych nurses that they just, whoever applies pretty much gets the job, and they train them for 5 days and expect you to run the floor. They're full of agency nurses that they just don't know what's going on. And last week we had a death on another unit. I was working my unit, and then there was a code. First it was a code gray, and I get there, and it was actually called a code blue. So medical shows up, and it was actually a code gray, which is combative, and the patient was up and posturing towards staff, and his thing is like grabbing private areas, and so they had to do a physical restraint on him. They gave him a B-52, except 10 of Haldol and not 5. And then like 10 minutes later was code blue, so I'm running there to the unit. I was the first one on site, and the unit was super calm. There was nothing going on. The nurse wasn't there. The nurse was agency, and I'm like, hey, is it a gray or blue? And the techs were like, oh no, it's a code blue on 2. Like, just calm. So I walked to that room, and this patient was blue. He was not breathing. He was not responsive. He was flatlined. So I initiated CPR. It's just a lot of things that could have gone better, did not. And come to find out, that patient had just been cleared for ECT. He had his treatment. He had already received treatments in the past, but this was his first treatment at this revocation court order. And then digging more into the chart, because I'm a risk nurse by trade. He had a PE prior to being admitted. He was on Eliquis, which was initiated when he was admitted, because it's not a medication that we have on hand. It took him 20 days to get it. His EKG came back with prolongated QTs, and he was still on Haldol, oral Haldol, plus he had got another 10 milligrams IM that day. Just so many things that just, he was walkie-talkie 10 minutes prior, acting like himself, and then 10 minutes later he was coded and he was blue, and it was traumatic in the event that, in psych we don't we get patients that are supposed to be medically cleared to focus on their psych problems, and he was 41, and it still bothers me to this day, just thinking like sometimes our mental health is not how it's supposed to be. Unfortunately, my hospital is very money driven. An hour after the patient passed, that bed was already filled by another patient. It's like there's just, I don't know. But it's just, it was interesting to see how ECT was done, and in my mind connecting the dots and what happened to this patient, and trying to advocate for the patient. I think that, nursing wise, being a floor nurse, I'm there, and agency had no idea where the crash cart was. The house supervisor they just placed in there, she has 1 year under her belt, was deer in headlights. Thank goodness 2 other nurses responded that are, strong nurses, have been nurses for 15, 16 years. And we all did compressions and we did our part, but those 3-4 minutes that I was by myself with 4 other brand new nurses was just as intense, and scary, you know, scary, to think that there just isn't enough training. And then they just hired a bunch of brand new graduates, literally brand new, just graduated and went straight into psych because 2 of those nurses told me because they paid more. And I'm just like, oh my goodness, my heart aches. I think our mental health patients need and deserve the care, both medical and psych. Um, Anyhow, I'm just going to stop rambling, but the cool thing about this week in clinicals was ECT. I'm very appreciative of Dr. Wilson to set that up for me, and Dr. W that allowed me to be there. I think it was really neat. All the prepping that goes behind it. It's, you're inducing a seizure. It was a little traumatic, I think, too, just to like see it. But it was really interesting, and I appreciate being there. And now I know, when you're being recommended ECT because nothing else has worked, what the patient goes through. So that's what I learned.